Accounts say that since every stone of the building was to be regarded as holy, 1,000 priests were trained as stonemasons. Dr. Guy Steibel believes he can identify evidence of their quarries.
One of the exciting things is that this cave preserved so freshly.
In an underground cavern 2 miles from Jerusalem, he has found a series of chisel marks. They match the exact shape of the stones used to build Herod's Temple Mount.
And what you can see here very clearly, you can see a line horizontally here, and another line goes down here, and you can see the edge of it. Basically, they would use sort of pickaxe, cutting grooves, and then using a crowbar to lever or to detach the stone block from the cave itself, from the wall of the cave, and remove it.
Some of these tools are still being used today. But in Jesus' time, the workers didn't have access to trucks or earth movers.
You can see very clearly that from the chiseling mark, this is a fairly neat straight line. Once it was removed, you can shape it exactly to the measurement that was required by your architect. And you wish to do it here, because then you have to schlep it, to carry it all the way, whether to the Temple Mount or to another area of construction. If you reduce the waste and all the things that you won't need later on, you have less weight to carry. So they were very, very practical.
Transportation required a combination of brute force and innovative engineering. Archaeologist Dr. Ronnie Reich has recreated one solution that the builders used. It's called a metagenes. It's a simple but effective system. The stone block becomes an axle between 2 wheels.
10 men could roll it to and fro. Each one of them actually moved 900 pounds of stone. And this is, of course, a burden that a single person cannot do by himself. So it's with this device that stone was moved.
When the stones had been delivered to the site, they still had to be maneuvered into place. On average, each one weighed at least 10 tons. Simple cranes were used to lift them.
Here we have constructed a bipod with ropes and pulleys, and the ropes can be pulled with levers. With 8 people working, we could lift the stone 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters high, and then let it down easily.
The end result would certainly have been magnificent. But one aspect of the temple's construction has always proved mysterious. The writer Josephus says that the temple was covered in marble and gold, and that from a distance it looked like a snow-capped mountain glittering in the sun. Some modern investigators find this hard to believe.
And the reason is there's no marble in Israel, in ancient Palestine. It doesn't exist. It all has to be imported from other places like Turkey and Greece. And we have very, very little marble imported to this country in the time of Jesus. It's not until later that marble starts to be imported in any sort of quantities.
Hillel Gelva may have found the answer. Deep below the street level of contemporary Jerusalem, he's excavated the preserved ruins of a rich person's house. The walls and ceilings are covered with intricate designs. And these designs show that Jerusalem's builders had the skill to sculpt plaster and create the illusion of stone. This wall has been cut to mimic the framed blocks that make up the walls of the Temple Mount.
This is imitation in plaster of construction in large blocks. Each block have a frame, and here it was left white, not decorated, but other examples are with decoration.
It seems possible then that the sanctuary's awe-inspiring facade was created using a very cunning technique.
So in my opinion, when our sources describe the temple as being made of marble or covered with marble. What they actually mean is that the building was made of a shining white stone, or perhaps stone covered with a polished stucco.
We can now show the temple as it would have looked when Jesus saw it. The focal point of the city, white and gold, with plumes of smoke rising from the sacrificial altars that stood in front of it. The building was a magnet for believers all over the Middle East. When Jesus came to Jerusalem for his last Passover, there may have been 250,000 other visitors there. Jerusalem struggled to cope. And while the pilgrims concerned themselves with spiritual matters, the daily life of this desert city was dictated by something much more basic: the need for water. Tradition has it that 1 week before his death, Jesus entered the city of Jerusalem in triumph. Crowds gathered to welcome him, chanting and waving palms. Many of the people were his followers, but the city was already full of people come to celebrate the feast of Passover.
The normal population of Jerusalem around the time of Jesus is probably well under 30,000. And probably during the time of the festivals, certainly the Passover festival, one can imagine that it might have been 10 times that. It might have been 300,000.
Jerusalem at this moment was the fastest growing settlement in the Middle East. It received over 1 million visitors a year. Our investigators have been trying to build a picture of what the city looked like and how it handled this massive influx of people. Some of the benefits seemed positive. Pilgrims brought wealth.
The construction of the temple itself engendered or created a lot of money. People came to Jerusalem as pilgrims. They had to spend money for lodging, for food, for gifts and souvenirs along the way, and of course pay the temple tax and also pay for sacrifices.
Decades of deep excavation along the western wall of the temple have uncovered the remains of a street 30 feet wide and 3,000 feet long, which functioned as a shopping mall. It's known as the Herodian Street. Jesus would have walked here.
This is the main street, the main thoroughfare of Jerusalem. And you have just to imagine the large number of people coming here to buy and sell things in the various shops along the street, or those who came on pilgrimage. This is the heart of Jerusalem.
Some archaeologists call this place Wall Street, acknowledging that it's the financial heart of the city. They have also pieced together physical evidence of the close relationship between these commercial interests and the spiritual life of the temple. Examination of the wall at the southern end of the street reveals the remains of an arch. It's known as Robinson's Arch. More than 50 feet tall and with a span of at least 40 feet, it served as one of the main entrances to the temple complex. And built into its base, against the walls of the Temple Mount, were stores that would sell goods to pilgrims.
That area, the area below it leading down to the great stairs that leave behind what is called Robinson's Arch, all of that one can imagine just overflowing with commerce. And all of these people, after all, they're heading up to the temple, and meanwhile, all along the way, there are hawkers saying, buy this, buy that.
Jesus must have encountered a scene like this as he entered the temple. Furious at what he saw, he set out to confront the authorities for the first time. It's said that he makes his way into the area called the Court of the Gentiles. Like every Jewish male, he had to pay a 2 shekel temple tax. The special coin needed could only be bought from the money changers in the temple complex. They had a reputation for corruption.
I can imagine that, changing money might lead to fraud, to taking advantage of innocent people from the countryside, etc., who are not used to city life. And he probably was standing aside and looked and watched those people cheating occasionally, and made him mad.
This is the one occasion in the Gospels when Jesus is said to have shown his rage.
It's going too far within the temple precincts as far as Jesus is concerned. Get out of here.
He made a whip and threw them out, turned round the tables and said, "What you're doing? You are converting my father's house into a cave of robbers."
But if pilgrims gave the city its income, they also had to be provided for, and the most valuable resource in Jerusalem was water. Jerusalem was and is a desert city. It stands 2,500 feet above sea level. The nearest river is 25 miles away.
How do all those thousands upon thousands of people in Jerusalem get their drinking water?
There were 30 rain-filled reservoirs around the city. The largest held a volume of water equivalent to 20 Olympic swimming pools, and yet supply could barely meet demand.
They must have crowded around them. They must have waited around them for their turn, because there weren't that many, and there were many pilgrims.
People didn't only need water for domestic purposes.
They need an inordinate amount of water for purification purposes. They need to be ritually pure to go up to the temple and visit it.
As part of daily religious observance, and particularly before going to the temple, every Jew was required to cleanse himself ritually by washing in what was called living water. Jerusalem had many pools designed for this purpose, called mikvahs. It was at the biggest and busiest of these, the Pool of Siloam, where Jesus is said to have performed one of his final miracles.
In the Gospel of John, we hear of the story of him healing the blind man. He takes some dirt from the ground, spits on it, smears it on his eyes, and says, "Now go and wash in the Pool of Siloam."
It was a chance discovery during engineering work on a nearby pipe that led Ronnie Reich to pinpoint the precise location of this pool and understand just how large the Siloam pool was. Fed by one of Jerusalem's only natural springs via a tunnel 600 yards long, it's thought to have covered up to 20,000 square feet. If Jesus did heal a blind man who came and bore witness here, then the story of this apparent miracle would have been heard by hundreds and then spread throughout Jerusalem. It was a public challenge to the city's authorities. As investigators, archaeologists, and biblical scholars try to understand the unique metropolis that was Jerusalem in the time of Jesus, an extraordinary picture is emerging. This is a desert city obsessed by water, where spiritual matters govern every aspect of daily life, where practical, innovative engineering sits side by side with mysticism, where in the run-up to big religious festivals, crowds would gather at key points in the city. Shimon Gibson has been part of the team trying to uncover and recreate the most intriguing such site, the Bethesda Pool. Lying to the north of the temple complex, it is at this pool that, according to the Gospel of John, Jesus told a paralyzed man to take up his bed and walk. Archaeologists have dug down 40 feet through 2,000 years of rubble to uncover the place as Jesus would have seen it. What's fascinating is that even before he came here, this pool was said to have healing powers.
Jesus comes to the Bethesda pool, and there is a whole lineup of elderly people, of crippled people, of blinded people, and they're waiting essentially to get their turn in the pool.
The man who Jesus cured is said to have waited years for a chance to bathe in the waters here. And what Shimon Gibson discovers fits the story.
The steps from the time of Jesus are very well preserved. As you can see, there's a flight of steps here with a landing between each set of steps. These landings fit in very well with the Gospel of John's story.